Time and again, Trudeau has shown his party's stance on firearms to be based on rhetoric and ideology. Are they the exception to this, or the rule? Let's have a look. So a couple weeks ago in my last video, I suggested that things were probably going to get worse for us in the near future regarding firearms, and actually, in a weird twist of fate, it's actually gone the opposite way. We actually have a fair amount of good news to go over in the last 2 weeks. And I don't know, I didn't see that coming. We're going to be going over a whole bunch of things today, but I'm going to be going over them all fairly quickly. There's quite a few small stories to look at here. I'm going to put all of the links in the description below. You can have a look and read these stories for yourself if you want, but I'm only going to really be touching on them briefly. I'm not going to be diving into each story too hard because there's quite a few to go through here. So let's take a look. I'm sure some of you have already heard by now, but Ontario released an announcement that they will not be participating in the buyback program, or at the very least, they're not going to be dedicating any provincial resources or police officers to the buyback program, that is astronomically huge for us. They joined the likes of Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, and the Yukon, who have basically outright said that they're not going to help in the buyback program, and most other provinces up to this point have already said that it's going to be a low priority for them, but that they probably would help, they probably would participate. So now that Ontario is a part of the buyback boycott, the buyback is basically certainly doomed. It was already pushed off till beyond the next election, so it was very unlikely to happen anyway. But without Ontario's participation, there really is no way to get this going. They are the most populous province in Canada, and a very visible populace for most of the country. We out in the West tend to get forgot about in a lot, and a lot of times we even get vilified in the media and by Trudeau and whatever. But with Ontario really putting their foot down and saying no more, it basically makes it impossible. So the buyback is dead in the water. It's not going to happen unless something dramatic changes, which that's great. I'm happy for that. That's a win for us. And then on top of that, Yukon's making waves as well. Yukon plans on making its own Firearms Act and joining the likes of Alberta and Saskatchewan in doing so. I'm not going to read this story too hard. You can take a look at it. But among other things, they want to establish their own CFO, because actually their firearms program is run through BC, apparently. I didn't know that until I saw this story. But they want to establish their own regime, get their own stuff going, and protect the rights of their own hunters and their own sport shooters and so on. And I think that's a very good thing. I think that's huge. The more provinces that do this, the better. And I'm excited that Yukon is on board for that. And speaking of Alberta and Saskatchewan, they have now both applied for intervener status in the legal challenges that are going on in the Federal Court of Appeals right now. These legal challenges are a part of what the CCFR was doing last year when they took the federal government to task on their OICs and their buybacks and their handgun freeze, as well as most of C21 and C71, and really just raking them over the coals. And if you guys heard about what happened there, that didn't go well. They lost everything, but then they appealed, and we're now going to have a fight at the Federal Court of Appeals here. And Alberta and Saskatchewan have applied for intervener status to help the CCFR out. And that's, again, that is huge. That is big for them. That is big for the CCFR. That's also big for the other applicants in the case, because having provincial government backing against the federal government, which isn't that uncommon. That happened in the Emergencies Act. Alberta was an intervener in that as well. And that happens in a number of cases. That this isn't particularly unusual, but it is a huge help. So this is really, really exciting. I'm super stoked. I'm from Saskatchewan myself, so I'm happy my province is getting in on the fight. That should, anything they can do to help, I'm stoked. And actually, the Saskatchewan government has been doing quite a bit. I'm pretty, for the most part, happy with it, but I'm going to get into, later in the video, I'm going to say some things that they're doing that really irk me. But we'll take the wins where we can. And here's the CCFR just talking about that.
The province of Saskatchewan has decided they are going to intervene on our behalf on our federal court appeal.
That's right. So that's breaking news this week out of the Prairie Province. And there's a great quote here from Justice Minister and Attorney General Bronwyn Iyer. And she says, "We believe in the merits of this case on administrative and constitutional grounds. The federal ban already includes up to 1,800 variants, will cost billions of dollars, and directly conflicts with sections of the criminal code which state that firearms that can reasonably be used for hunting or sporting purposes cannot be banned."
Right. Here's another team of lawyers in the provincial government going, yeah, no, there's no way that the CCFR should have lost in this. Like the other things, we went in on self-defense, we went in on other charter challenges. But the one thing that we shouldn't have lost on at all was the administrative law portion.
Right.
as I've said, I don't know how many times before. And there's a lot of people agreeing with that. So it's very interesting that the Judge Kane ruled against us in the first place. But whatever, this is good news.
Yeah, it's great. I like seeing them stack up behind us. It's absolutely awesome.
Yeah, I mean, what they're doing is wrong. And, it's good to see that not all governments are just like, how are we doing in polling? Can we destroy these people and stay in power because these people will like that? Or
So Rod Giltacker from the CCFR, he also went on the Andrew Lawton show, and he kind of said the same thing here. I'm not actually going to go over this video. I'm going to put it in the description so that you can watch it. But he says basically the same thing here. He's surprised with the court ruling, especially for the fact that their particular argument was that they were arguing that it was ultra vires, which, if you remember from our Emergencies Act video, that basically means it was outside the scope of the law. It was beyond the authority they had in order to act. But I'll put this video in the description below and you can have a look at it. This is the page from October when the CCFR received the ruling from the federal court saying that they lost. Now it says read the decision here. I can't actually show you guys that. For whatever reason, the link is broken. It just takes you to this page. It says you can't find the website. It's not something on my end. There's nothing wrong with my firewalls or anything like that. I mean, obviously you can see all these other pages I'm going to. Everything's working fine. So I don't know what that is. If CCFR, if you're watching this, your link is broken. And if you could fix that so that we could take a look at the ruling, that'd be great. I'm not going to go over this portion of it. I'll put it in the link in the description below. But essentially what this ruling was about and what the CCFR's case was about is this law here. Section 117.15, subsection 2 of the Criminal Code. It's this particular part right here. It says, in making regulations, the Governor and Council may not prescribe anything to be a prohibited firearm, a restricted firearm, a prohibited weapon, a restricted weapon, a prohibited device, or prohibited ammunition, if in the opinion, that's a key, the opinion, if in the opinion of the Governor and Council, the thing is to be prescribed is reasonable for use in Canada for hunting or sporting purposes. And that's really what the CCFR was talking about. They banned over 1,800 variants and styles and so on of assault-style firearms. But essentially, those were all restricted weapons or restricted firearms. And the reason that the CCFR thinks that this is a violation, that they didn't have the authority to do that, is because of the fact that they were restricted firearms. As many of you probably know, but for those who don't, in order to have a restricted firearm in Canada, you need to pass an additional licensing course. So on top of your PAL, you also need an RPAL. They are two separate courses with two separate tests you need to pass. But you need to pass two separate tests, one for non-restricted firearms and then a separate one for restricted firearms. On top of that, you then also need to be a registered member of a shooting club. So you have to join a club somewhere. They're not that much money. I'm a part of actually a couple of different clubs. But you need to provide evidence before you can purchase a restricted firearm that you're a part of a registered shooting club somewhere. And the reason for that is because the only place you can discharge a restricted firearm legally is at a shooting range. You can't hunt with them. Broadly speaking, you can't engage in self-defense with them, although it'd be difficult to do. There's probably some hypothetical situation where it happens. Because the storage regulations are so strict in Canada for all kinds of firearms, but especially for restricted firearms, they have an increased level of storage requirements. It is very difficult to find yourself in a situation where you can lawfully use such a firearm in self-defense. So really the only lawful reason you could have owned any restricted firearm in Canada was for sporting purposes. It was baked into the framework of the law. The only place you could discharge them was at a range. Even if you've got 500 acres of land out in the country somewhere, you can't actually shoot a handgun out there because it's a restricted firearm. You have to go to a range somewhere. Even if you're completely isolated from everybody else, there's no one around for 5 kilometers, doesn't matter. The only place you can shoot a handgun or something like an AR-15 is at a shooting range, which means the only lawful purpose for those things in Canada is sport shooting. There is no other lawful purpose. So that's probably the argument the CCFR was making. I can't find any court records or any documents regarding that ruling. Maybe I got to work on my Google Foo a little bit, I'm not sure. But that's probably the argument they were making, and that's a very strong argument. The big hiccup there is this word here, opinion. Is it possible for the Governor and Council to hold an opinion that is, if he was a flat earther, he's not, but let's say he was, and that was his opinion, even though he's flat out wrong, and all of the evidence says that he's flat out wrong, it is still his opinion. So I think that's going to be hard to overturn, even though the CCFR is completely correct in this situation. I don't know that because of that word, I don't know how easy that's going to be to overturn in court. Now, any sensible human being, based on what I just told you, they are sporting firearms. They're sporting rifles, they're sporting handguns. That is the only lawful purpose that you've been allowed to have those for decades. For at least since 1995 in Canada. That is the only allowable reason you've been allowed to have those, with the rare exception of people who have ATCs or need them for employment purposes or something like that. But largely speaking, it's sporting only. That's the only thing. You can't hunt with them. You can't protect yourself with them. And even firearm collectors needed to go through that, need to get an RPAL and need to be registered at a shooting range before they can buy them, even just for collecting purposes. So that's the argument. I wish them all the luck in the world. Any sane, reasonable judge should agree with that argument and should overturn the OICs, all 1,800 of them, just on the merits of the law itself. But that word opinion does make it kind of tricky, because an opinion is a hard thing to disprove. Even if you're completely wrong, it's still your opinion, and you can be completely wrong and hold that wrong opinion at the same time. So we already know that the Liberal government doesn't particularly like firearms owners, but this ruling that was handed down by the federal court against the CCFR, that for me kind of shows a pretty high level of contempt for firearms owners. Unless they were really getting hung up on that word opinion, if they were really getting hung up on that word, and that's a valid, legal, structured argument, I'm not sure. But as I explained it to you, like there really is no other lawful use for restricted firearms, for AR-15s and for handguns and so on. There is no other lawful use for those. And they were just banned outright through OIC. And this particular regulation says they cannot do that. That is illegal. So for me, this shows that the court has a pretty strong amount of contempt for firearms owners, or at least that particular judge did. And that's a pretty big problem. So not only is the Liberal government showing a fair amount of dismissiveness towards us, which we kind of expect at this point, this federal court also shows a fair degree of contempt for us as well by not handing down a favorable ruling, at least in this particular scenario. It is very clear-cut based on this particular law that they did not have the power to do what they did with the OICs in 2020. It was literally against the law for them to do what they did, which, just like in the Emergencies Act, with their invocation of the Emergencies Act, it was ultra vires. They didn't have the power to do what they did. And the CCFR would have made that argument, and the federal judge would have just dismissed it. I'm not sure. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So the Liberal government is very dismissive of us. The federal courts have contempt for us.
Our list of allies grows thin.
Now some of you watching might be going, yeah, but they're not all bad. Like the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre, they really believe in this stuff and they'll help us out. And I think they will help us out. I think they're going to pass a whole bunch of pretty favorable laws. Although I do want you guys to curb your expectations. A lot of people are saying Pierre's going to bring in castle laws and concealed carry and all this stuff. I haven't seen any evidence of that. We're going to get into that in a bit, but I haven't seen any evidence of that. So slow your roll a little bit. He's going to do, I think, a lot of good things for us, but I don't think he's going that hard at it. But let's take a look at what he has to say about all this. So a couple weeks ago in Parliament, they were having sort of a question period. Pierre and Trudeau were going back and forth on the firearm issue. And this was the exchange they had. And I really hate how this went down. But just have a look. I'm going to crop this down because they go back and forth for a couple of minutes. But I'll squish this down into sort of a digestible back and forth to make this video a little more streamlined.
I've already responded to the concerns on car theft, but the leader of the opposition wants to talk about common sense and crime and violence. Why is he listening to the American gun lobby, which wants to bring back assault-style rifles to our streets and to our communities? Each stage over the last 8 years, he's tried to block our gun control measures because he is being controlled by the American gun lobby instead of standing up to protect communities and control guns.
And now he's spreading disinformation years after he promised he was going to ban these so-called military assault rifles. They're still legal in Canada.
But Canadians will not be fooled by him. The Order in Council that made assault-style weapons illegal to use, to purchase, or to share or sell is still in place.
Mr. Speaker, he stumbles and bumbles when he does not know what he's talking about, and he does not know what he's talking about because he does not care what he's talking about. He still has not banned those guns.
Mr. Speaker, as of a number of years ago, it is illegal to buy, sell, or use or bequeath military-style or assault-style weapons in this country. We did that. We banned over 1,600 models of assault-style weapons. The Conservative Party wants to make those assault-style weapons legal again. And everything they do is focused on misinformation and disinformation, of bringing in hunters who are not targeted by these measures to try and justify their anchoring on the NRA.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
More stumbling and bumbling, Mr. Speaker. The guns he talked about are not banned. And he says they will not be banned until 1 week after the next election because he cannot figure out how to ban them, years after he announced it.
Mr. Speaker, in May of 2020, we rendered it illegal to buy or sell or use or bequeath 1,600 different models of assault-style weapons in this country. That is still the case, Mr. Speaker. In the coming year, we will be bringing in an amnesty legacy program. We're extending the amnesty to be able to bring in a buyback for the owners of these weapons. But we are moving forward on gun control when he wants to bring assault-style weapons back to Canadians.
So there you have it. That's the exchange. As you expect from Trudeau, he deals exclusively in rhetoric. He's a stumbling, bumbling fool. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He just uses casual throwaway insults and, his misinformation, his disinformation, the normal stuff. We all expect that now. He's been doing it for years. It's not new. But what bugs me about that exchange actually wasn't what Trudeau said. That's all normal. It's what Pierre said. And what Mr. Poilievre was saying, it bugs me. It really bugs me. Not because he's not right or anything like that. He said a number of good things in there. But one thing in particular he kept driving home was the fact that these firearms, things like AR-15s and so on, weren't banned. And, Trudeau's right on this one. They were banned in 2020. If you're one of the people who has an AR-15 at home, or any one of those 1,600 other firearms, I think it's actually 1,800, I'm not sure why they're saying 1,600, but whatever the number is, if you have one of those firearms and you can't use it, that firearm is as good as banned. If taking it outside and using it at a gun range to shoot paper or cans or steel or whatever in a lawful, controlled manner, that could send you to jail for up to 10 years and lose your firearms license and like very stiff, heavy, hardcore penalties. Poilievre is sitting there like on a technicality going, oh, well, they're not banned yet because we haven't confiscated them yet. Like, no, they're banned. And it bugs me because that's the argument he's going with. He's dealing in these little petty semantics, these tiny technicalities, and it's like, well, technically, kind of, yeah, they aren't sort of banned, kind of, but they're hardly legal. And that really bugs me because our argument is so much better than that. Like, we are being so unjustly treated, so unfairly wronged, just clear as day, black and white. Bill C-21, this is a video I'm going to make in the future here, but Bill C-21 violates nearly every one of the available first 15 sections of the Charter, which are generally considered to be your various civil liberties that you have in Canada. And C-21 violates nearly all of them. And despite that, Poilievre wants to banter about like semantics and technicalities. Like, no, he's got to start stepping into it. And for me, that really shows that his stance on firearms is as rhetoric-based as Trudeau's is. Even though he happens to be right about it, it's not really a critical issue to him. When you watch him talk about things like the economy or finance or housing or even crime, which is kind of in our wheelhouse here, but even if you watch him talk about crime, on his YouTube channel, he actually has a video called, I think it's called Extortion. I watched it a couple days ago, and like he has very, very concrete, very specific things he's going to do about the extortion problem. He has very concrete and specific things he's going to do about the car theft problem. Like really hardcore, nitty-gritty, detailed things he's going to do. But when it comes to firearms, it's just broad, repetitive rhetoric in the same way that Trudeau uses broad, repetitive rhetoric, just on opposite ends of the scales. And I do not like that. I don't like that at all. I think that's very disappointing from him. And this isn't even necessarily just my opinion. There's quite a bit of evidence to back this up. So if we take a look at the CPC's policy declarations, this is kind of where they stand on a number of things as of September 9th. And if we go down to Section 127 here, it actually shows us their stance on the various firearm policies. Now in here, there are a couple of things I do actually like. In particular, these areas right here, like I think that's pretty solid That's a pretty solid base to at least start the conversation on. And I do like that, but there's no specifics anywhere here. And he very rarely deals in specifics when he talks about firearms. And that's for me fairly evident that this is a voting issue as much for him as it is for Trudeau. And for me, that makes me fairly disappointed. On occasion, though, he does deal in specifics, and he did have this to say regarding the OICs. This was posted on Twitter January 26, 2024. I don't know if this was filmed close to that date, or if this was just uploaded on that date, but that's the closest date I have for this.
Allowed to possess. Like, blows my mind. So I'd like to see that OIC definitely, as soon as you can, if we can get that reversed.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Common sense.
Yeah.
In fact, we're going to take away the OIC power altogether so that ministers can no longer arbitrarily designate a firearm as illegal. In fact, what we're going to do is create empirical standards that determine which firearms are restricted, unrestricted, and prohibited based on what the gun does, not on how it looks. Then we're going to embed that in the law, and that law will be frozen and crystallized so that when you buy a firearm, you don't risk that the next day some political pollster or propagandist is going to tell the minister that it would be good politics to ban such and such firearm because it looks scary.
So for me, that sounds pretty good, although I think we could do better. But that's kind of why I was telling you guys, curb your expectations. A lot of people really think Pierre Poilievre's going to come out of the gate swinging and restore all our firearm rights and give us concealed carry and all this stuff and the castle laws, and it's just, I just don't see that happening. I do see him repealing C-21, C-71. I do see him overturning the OICs, but really what we're going to be looking at is going back to the way it was before. I doubt it's going to get much better than that. Maybe a little bit, but probably not by much. I could be wrong. But based on everything I've seen, not just in this video, but the stuff I've been looking at for the last couple years, I just don't see that happening. Now, earlier I said I was going to go over some stuff regarding the Saskatchewan government's stance on firearms and hunters and so on. And this video has already gone rather long, so I think I'm going to actually put that in another video. But briefly speaking, I just want to show people and remind people that even for the good guys and the people that are on our side sort of thing, like the Saskatchewan government has been about as staunch a supporter of firearms and hunters and sport shooters and so on as you could reasonably expect a government to be. We're dying a slow death, and I think the Saskatchewan government is kind of an extremely perfect example of this. They have gone out of their way a number of times to stick it to the federal government in order to protect hunters and sport shooters and firearms owners. They were among the first provinces to boycott the buyback. They were, I think, the first province to institute their own Firearms Act, kind of directly targeted at screwing the feds out of the buyback. But the Saskatchewan government has actually done some positive things for hunters over the last few years. One of the things they did, actually, if you take a look at this firearm back here, that's my WK-180C Gen 2. That is a non-restricted firearm that shoots .223 ammunition or .556 ammunition. You can actually hunt with that in Saskatchewan. One of the changes they made, I believe it was in 2018 or 2019, I forget the year. But you can hunt with that. You can hunt with a .223 in Saskatchewan now, and that's thanks to the provincial government. Prior to him, you had to hunt with a 24 caliber or higher, so really .243 was the lowest caliber you could use. And the reason they did that was to prevent people from hunting with AR-15s and such like that. But in Saskatchewan, that's not the case anymore. You still can't hunt with an AR-15 because it's a restricted firearm, but if you have a non-restricted .223, which is, I mean, that's essentially kind of an AR-15. Mechanically, it's different, but functionally, it's about the same. You can hunt big game with that now. Not just coyotes, not just predators, not just small game, you can hunt big game with that, which I think is great. .223 is not the world's greatest hunting cartridges, but it'll take an antelope, it'll take a deer. If you're going for moose or elk, I'd probably suggest something bigger, but there's nothing wrong with that. It'd be plenty capable for targets like that. That being said, they've also caused, for me at least, some fairly significant harm. Starting in January of 2022, they implemented changes to the Trespassing Act in Saskatchewan, and that really took the wind out of our sails as hunters. I mean, it's very difficult to hunt now in Saskatchewan. We went from being able to hunt almost everywhere in Saskatchewan to almost nowhere in Saskatchewan, at least not without permission. And the reason the Saskatchewan government made this change, or at least the stated reason for why they made this change, was because of the increase in rural crime. In particular, Scott Moe, who's the Premier of Saskatchewan, was saying that he hopes that these laws and these new provisions can crack down on theft and vandalism. But hunters aren't the thieves, hunters aren't the vandals. And then this is taken directly from the review of the legislation before it was proposed and announced and passed. It says here that it doesn't really affect anybody's rights. In particular, they're talking about treaty and First Nations rights here, but it says it doesn't actually affect anybody's rights because they don't have these rights to begin with. And I don't know if you noticed, but that's kind of exactly what the Liberal government says about hunters and firearms owners. They say there's a crime problem, so we need to punish all of the people who are following the law. And then people like me who go, well, that's not really fair. They say, well, you don't have any right to it, so we can do it. That is exactly, perfectly what the Liberals say about us. And this is coming from the Saskatchewan government. They are maybe the biggest government supporter of firearms rights and firearms freedoms here in Canada. And they have exactly the same view about us that the Liberals do, which is, it just breaks my heart. Everywhere I look, all of our governments and all of our politicians, this is just a voting issue for them. None of them really care. None of them truly care. I mean, it's politics. You expect that. I don't think any of them truly care about much of anything, if we're being honest. But especially this. And it sucks. So I'm going to make this, it's probably its own separate video. I'm going to go into a little bit more. Hopefully it'll be a shorter video, but my videos tend not to be very short, as you've all seen. But we're going to move on. So despite all of the good news we've got in the last couple of weeks, I'm still not totally thrilled about what we're seeing. Maybe it's the pessimist in me, but I don't think we're on our way to having any kind of permanent firearms rights in Canada, or firearms freedoms even in Canada, which is unfortunate. The only real way out of this long term is to convince either the masses, convince everybody in democracy that we are worth protecting, that our freedoms and our cultures and our rights, even in some instances, are worth protecting, that we are people worth protecting, which I don't really see happening. With how polluted the mainstream media is and how social media is, it's going to be an almost impossible feat to do that. I just don't see that happening. Our only other option, realistically, is to convince the courts. And that actually does have some reasonable chance of happening. So in order to get out from underneath the thumb of the government, either pro or anti-gun, conservatives or liberals or whoever is in power in the future, in order to become unbound from them and not tied to their whims or to the voting cycle or to anything like that, we really do need to convince the courts. And that's no easy feat either. That is going to be a very difficult and almost impossible thing to do. But it is the sort of thing that could theoretically happen. It won't be an easy task, but we'll have to convince the courts, probably the Supreme Court, that our culture is worth protecting. We are, in some sense, we're kind of like the last minority group in Canada who really doesn't have the same core rights that every other Canadian has. Under Section 15 of the Charter, we should be protected from discrimination, and we just aren't. What the Liberal government is doing to us is very clearly discrimination, but for some reason it doesn't count. And I think the reason for that, as I showed earlier with the federal court ruling, I think the reason for that is the courts hold us in contempt. They're very dismissive of us, and they don't view our freedoms and our rights as intrinsic the way they do other cultures and other peoples within Canada. Which is why that exchange in Parliament earlier bugged me so much. If we are to try and convince the courts, and theoretically even the Supreme Court, that we are worth protecting, that above and beyond what any government thinks, that we deserve to exist and that our culture deserves to exist, we can't do that by dealing in semantics and technicalities. That is not... Our argument is so much better than that. And it's frustrating to me to see people like Pierre Poilievre to treat us and our problems as a voting issue, rather than as any kind of human rights issue, or even something he would just personally believe in, which for me, it's just incredibly frustrating. That's actually one of the reasons I built this channel. I want to get a lot of this out there. I want to put forth these arguments so that people can be better informed and that they can debate better, so that they can better educate people, and hopefully we can turn some of this momentum around. So in addition to my upcoming video on the Saskatchewan government problem, I'm also going to be taking a look at, hopefully even maybe creating a video series that really goes through how to not deal in semantics and technicalities. So I do want to take a look at, not necessarily debunking, but giving people alternatives to the innately weak arguments that a lot of firearms owners use. Like, we are on the right side of this and we don't need to resort to weak arguments. I often hear a lot of people saying things like, the government can't buy back our firearms because they never owned them in the first place, kind of thing. Like, you're not technically wrong, but that's not a very good argument. That's not going to convince other people who need to be convinced that we need protecting. That argument will never work on them. That's such a technical argument. That's such a semantic argument. That's not a very good argument. You should be saying other things instead. So I think I'll probably make a video series where I'm going to make a whole bunch of smaller videos on one particular phrase that people use and really give people better alternatives to those phrases and to those sayings. Because those sayings are fine and those arguments are fine, but that's kind of preaching to the choir. And the choir isn't what needs convincing. We need to convince other people. We need to convince the masses. We need to convince the courts. We need to convince politicians, the people who actually have the power to help us in this situation, which is what bugs me about Pierre Poilievre. He's using weak arguments when it comes to firearms, which to me proves that it's just rhetoric for him. In the same way that Trudeau uses incredibly weak arguments when he's talking about firearms. I mean, you saw that bumbling mess that I showed you earlier. Dude was stuttering and umming and awing and throwing cheap insults everywhere. Like he just has no idea what he's talking about. And his entire stance on this is rhetoric based. So we got to drop the rhetoric and we got to start dealing in more tangibles and dealing in more substance in order to convince the people who need convincing who can help us out. Because we can't win this on our own. There's too few of us. We are a minority group, and in a democracy, minority groups just don't have enough power to stand on their own. We need to convince people who are not a part of our group in order to stand with us. That's the only way out of this long term. And weak arguments don't get us there. So if you guys have any arguments that you like to use or bad arguments that you've heard other people use, kind of not dumb things, but maybe dumb things, but also things that are semantics or technicalities or things are like, yeah, you're kind of right, but at the same time, like, what are you saying, If you guys have heard anything like that, put them in the comment section down below, and maybe I can start building a list to help this series kind of start out, and hopefully I can build on it from there. So that's all for this video. If you liked it, please like, hit subscribe. We're coming up on 1,000 subscribers. I do really want to get over that threshold if we can. It costs you nothing, but it'll help us out a lot. Once we hit 1,000, I'm going to stop asking. But 1,000 is the threshold I need to join the partnership program in order to help YouTube promote the channel. So if you guys can just take a second, hit that subscribe, that'd be just 1,000,000% appreciated. All that being said, that's all for now, and we'll see you in the next video.